The house was still. Morning light crept through the half-closed blinds, brushing pale stripes across the kitchen counter. A mug of ginger tea sat untouched beside a plate of toast, both forgotten as Carolyn stared at the screen in front of her, her hand hovering over the touchpad like it might bite her. This wasn't her desktop. No soft green background with her garden sketches. No folders labeled Phase 3 renderings or City Center proposal. Instead, the screen showed spreadsheets, dozens of them, stark white rows of quarterly earnings, something about fund performance, an acronym she couldn't decode. The only folder that looked vaguely familiar was titled Client Assets Review Q4. Carolyn blinked. Then she blinked again, harder this time, as if her eyes were playing tricks. She leaned in closer. There had to be a mistake. She tapped the keyboard, called up the File Explorer. Nothing. Not a single image of her proposed fountain design, the floral lattice she'd reworked 4 times, or the notes on native grasses for dry climates. All gone. Her breath tightened. She glanced toward the kitchen window, where the sky outside held that washed-out hue of an overcast morning. Her shoulders ached with the kind of tension that only came from overnight flights and half-slept hours in airport chairs. Maybe, just maybe, she was overtired and opening the wrong file. She checked the label on the laptop. Black casing, light scratch on the corner. It looked like hers. Felt like hers. But it wasn't. The realization hit with the weight of a dropped stone. She'd picked up the wrong computer. Somewhere between Terminal B's coffee kiosk and the scramble for a cab, she'd grabbed someone else's machine. A dull thud of panic stirred in her chest. Her files. Her work. Her entire proposal for the Franklin Urban Renewal Project. The presentation was due in 5 days. And not just any presentation. This was the one that could move her from small contracts in private gardens to city-scale commissions. Career maker. Carolyn stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. She paced the kitchen once, then sat again. Her fingers moved, fast now, scanning the stranger's folders for any identifying information. An email address, a name, anything. Most of it was buried in business language, too dry to give clues. Finally, in a folder labeled Personal, she found a single Word document. Emergency contacts. She opened it. Near the bottom, Miles Carter Personal. 415. Miles Carter. The name landed like a verdict. She didn't know who he was, but judging from the contents of his laptop, he worked in finance, and probably wasn't thrilled his laptop had been swapped by a stranger. She grabbed her phone, hands unsteady, and dialed the number. Voicemail. No greeting, just a mechanical voice reading out the digits again before the tone. She hung up, then stared at the screen. Her own laptop could be anywhere by now. Left behind in a taxi, scooped up by someone else, or worst case, sitting on Miles Carter's desk while he did exactly what she was doing now, panicking. She tried the number again. Still no answer. A sinking pressure settled behind her ribs. The laptop held not just files, but her only copy of the final renderings. She had a backup on a flash drive, but the flash drive had been in the same carry-on pocket as the laptop. If the laptop was gone, so was the drive. Carolyn exhaled slowly, clenching the phone in her lap. She could feel her pulse tapping in her neck, her temples, her wrists. Not now. Not like this. She'd fought too hard to get here. 2 years rebuilding after the divorce, balancing freelance jobs with half-finished sketches, knocking on city doors just to be told to wait. The Franklin bid had been her break. A real chance. And now, because of a bleary-eyed mix-up in an airport, it could vanish before she even made it to the table. She rose and walked to the front door, needing air. But the morning was heavy with drizzle. Gray mist clung to the front steps, and her car, still dusty from last week's site visit, sat idle in the driveway. She stood there a moment, the phone still in her hand, watching the steam curl from her half-finished tea through the window. The house felt too quiet, like it was waiting to see what she'd do next. Something tightened in her spine. She wasn't done. Not yet. She turned on her heel, headed back to the table, and opened the laptop again. If this Miles Carter was the kind of person who stored financial projections in triplicate, He had to have someone, an assistant, a receptionist, a gatekeeper of some sort. Carolyn opened the email client. Most names were cryptic, but one signature stood out. Gwen M., Executive Coordinator. It included an office line. She took a deep breath and pressed dial. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Yes. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, and not at all pleased to be interrupted. Hi, I'm sorry, is this Miles Carter? Carolyn asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. There was a pause. Speaking. Who is this? My name is Carolyn Brooks. I believe there's been a mix-up. I flew into Oakland late last night, and I just realized I must have taken the wrong laptop at the airport. Another pause. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch. Excuse me. I opened the computer this morning and realized it wasn't mine, she continued. I found your name in a document. How did you get access to my documents? His tone turned sharp with a metallic edge. Are you aware this laptop contains confidential financial data? What exactly are you trying to do here? I'm not trying to do anything, Carolyn said, standing up from her chair. Her palms were beginning to sweat. It was a mistake. I picked it up at the terminal by accident. I thought it was mine. I just want to get it back to you. You expect me to believe that? He snapped. You go through my files, extract my personal number, and now you're calling me to what? Offer a trade. Her jaw tensed. No. I'm calling because I figured you'd want your laptop back and… Let me be clear. He cut her off, his words now deliberate, ice under pressure. If anything on that device has been tampered with, you'll be hearing from my legal team. She blinked. Excuse me. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is private corporate property. You've already committed a breach by opening it. Carolyn felt heat rise in her face. She stepped back from the counter, pressing the speaker button so she didn't have to hold the phone anymore. You think I stole it? That this was some grand scheme to what? Sell your spreadsheets to the highest bidder. I don't know who you are. That's the problem. And I don't know who you are, but I'm not the one threatening lawsuits while sitting on my computer and probably my flash drive, she shot back. You want to play hardball, go ahead. But we both know you don't want this to drag out. Silence. Then the sound of a heavy exhale. She could almost hear him grinding his teeth. Fine, he said finally. You said you flew into Oakland? Yes. I'll be in Berkeley later this afternoon. Downtown, near the library plaza. There's a public bench under the big fig tree. 3 o'clock. Not a minute later. He ended the call before she could answer. Carolyn stood in the middle of her kitchen, listening to the dial tone. Outside, the rain had thickened into a steady curtain, tapping rhythmically on the windows. She pressed the power button on the laptop, watching the glow disappear. Then she reached for her coat. It was going to be one of those days. The plaza was busy but quiet, the kind of urban calm that comes with wide sidewalks and mature trees. The fig tree Miles had mentioned stood like a sentinel near the library steps, its trunk gnarled, its shade dense and deep. Carolyn spotted him right away, tall, dark gray blazer, laptop bag slung across his chest like a sash. He stood straight as a fence post, scanning every passerby. She approached with the borrowed laptop held firmly in both hands, like a fragile package she couldn't afford to drop. He clocked her before she could speak. Miss Brooks, he said, clipped and flat. She nodded. That's me. He didn't offer a handshake, just took the laptop, popped it open and scanned the home screen. She watched as his jaw twitched. His fingers moved fast, checking folders, flipping through files like someone rifling a safe after a break-in. Finally, he gave a curt nod and looked up. Seems intact. Of course it is, she said. I told you it was a mistake. He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out another laptop, hers. He held it out, but just as she reached to take it, he hesitated. You left something, he said. She blinked. What? He pulled a tiny black flash drive from his breast pocket. This was in the side compartment of the case. Yours, I assume. Carolyn exhaled, chest sagging with relief. Yes. God. That's it. Thank you. But as she took the drive, she noticed his hand didn't move. He was still patting the inside of his jacket, then the laptop case, then the outer pocket. A crease formed between his eyebrows. Something wrong? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Just unzipped the entire bag and started removing things. Cords, documents, a tablet, a business card holder, the laptop. But his movements grew faster, more erratic. My drive, he muttered. What drive? He didn't look up. My drive. Encrypted. Private data. It was in the case this morning. Her fingers tightened around her own flash drive. Are you sure you didn't leave it somewhere? I don't leave things, he said sharply. But then he stopped, closed the bag, and stared down at it like it had betrayed him. The air between them thickened. The roles had flipped, clean and sudden. He no longer looked like the man ready to call his attorney. He looked cornered. Carolyn hesitated, then adjusted the strap on her shoulder. Was it in the laptop sleeve? He nodded, jaw tight. Where were you before the flight? A coffee shop, he said after a moment. Inside the terminal. Just before boarding. The one near gate 9? Yeah. She glanced past him toward the parking lot. The rain had stopped, though the sidewalk still shimmered. Come on, she said, already moving. Let's go look. He didn't follow right away. You don't have to. I know, she said, not looking back. But if it were still my data missing, I'd want help. After a second, he fell in beside her. The drive back was mostly quiet, save for the occasional update from his assistant via text. He didn't fidget, but the silence around him had changed. Less hostile now, more focused. Carolyn could feel the shift in the air between them. Less defense, more bracing. They pulled into the airport lot just shy of 4:30. The terminal had thinned out, with only a few travelers dragging their suitcases across the linoleum floors. The cafe near Gate 9 was still open, though the line had disappeared. This is it, she asked. He nodded. They split up, checking tables, seat cushions, even under the counter where the sugar packets sat in neat rows. A barista offered a glance over the lost and found bin. Nothing. Miles moved like a man trying not to run. She could see the tightness in his shoulders, the scan of his eyes, the tiny halt in his step every time he passed a spot where he might have sat. Finally, near a corner booth, Carolyn stopped. She pointed to a narrow crevice between the wall and the seat. Hand me a napkin, she said. He did. She knelt, reached in, and pulled out a small black object, dusty but intact. Miles took it from her slowly, like it might vanish if he moved too fast. Is that it? She asked. He turned it over in his fingers. Yeah. Then more quietly. Yeah, that's it. They stood there for a second longer than necessary. The bustle of the terminal carried on around them. Flights called, wheels rolled, coffee machines hissed. But in their little corner, the moment held. I owe you, he said finally. She shook her head. Let's just say we're even. But something about his expression shifted. A flicker of something softer, almost amused. You want coffee? He asked. She tilted her head, surprised. Just coffee, he added. She smiled faintly. Sure. As long as I get to pick the table this time. And for the first time that day, neither of them needed to say more. The booth they chose faced a wide window overlooking the taxi lane. Outside, the sun was beginning to lower, casting soft amber light on the wet concrete. Inside, the cafe had emptied, leaving only the hum of the espresso machine and the occasional hiss of milk steaming. Their drinks sat untouched between them, his black, hers some herbal blend she hadn't even tasted yet. For the first time, Carolyn noticed how tired his eyes looked. Not just from the day, but something longer, deeper. The kind of weariness that didn't start with a missed drive or a botched meeting. You're quieter now, she said, not unkindly. Miles gave a small shrug. Losing a week's worth of encrypted files in a public terminal takes the edge off a person. She smiled but didn't laugh. He looked down at his cup, then slowly back up at her. I didn't mean to come at you like I did. I've had a few rough months, Carolyn nodded, unsure if she should respond or let the silence hold. My sister used to tell me I had all the patience of a lawnmower, he added after a pause. That made her laugh soft and genuine. Was she older? He gave a half smile. By 8 years. She practically raised me. Carolyn's smile faded gently, replaced by something else, recognition maybe. What was her name? Lena. The name hit like a skipped heartbeat. Carolyn sat back slightly. Lena Carter? Miles blinked. You knew her. I didn't just know her, Carolyn said slowly. She was my botany instructor at Feather Ridge Community College. First year. He stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. You went to Feather Ridge? Carolyn nodded. 1991 to 93. She taught on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always wore a denim jacket with a monarch pin. He exhaled a soft laugh, one that caught somewhere in his chest. Yeah, that stupid butterfly. She said it reminded her that everything is part of a cycle. Miles's eyes dropped to the table. That sounds like her. They sat with it a moment. No need to explain the way the temperature between them had shifted. It had just happened. I remember she brought in seedlings from her own garden, Carolyn said, almost to herself. Let us take one home after finals. I kept mine alive for almost 2 years. He smiled, but it was touched with something sorrowful. She always said she wanted her students to take root somewhere. That was her thing, helping things grow. She helped me, Carolyn said. A lot more than she probably knew. The air between them had stilled. Not heavy, just full. Not awkward, intimate in a way that surprised them both. The kind of closeness that didn't come from years, but from seeing the same person through different windows. Miles looked out at the parking lot, at the sun sinking lower behind the terminal. She died 3 months ago, he said. Pancreatic. It was fast. Carolyn placed her hand lightly on the table, not reaching for his, not dramatic. Just there. Steady. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded, swallowing hard. Thanks. For a while neither spoke. The silence had changed again. Now it was something they shared, not something they fought through. It's strange, she said after a while, her voice softer. You lose a laptop and find, what? Some forgotten thread from another life. Miles looked at her. His face had softened, the corners of his mouth unguarded now. Maybe it wasn't lost. Maybe it was just misrouted. She tilted her head. Like luggage. He smiled. Exactly like luggage. They both chuckled, quiet, easy. Outside a breeze picked up. A paper cup rolled down the sidewalk. Inside, the warmth of the cafe wrapped around them like a slow exhale. And somewhere between memory and mistake, something had taken root. The flash drive turned up near the cafe's self-serve station, half tucked beneath the edge of the counter like it had tried to escape the chaos of the day. Carolyn spotted it first, a small black rectangle blending in with the shadows. She pointed, and Miles bent down to retrieve it, holding it up with a quiet exhale. He didn't say much, just turned it over in his fingers, checked the connector like a surgeon might examine a scalpel, then slipped it carefully into his pocket. The tension that had strung him tight all day finally slackened, just enough to soften the lines around his mouth. Carolyn leaned against the back of the booth, watching him. You know, she said. You just spent the better part of 2 hours assuming the worst, and your top secret data was hiding next to a stir stick and a sugar packet. He looked up at her, one brow arched. You want me to say it? She shrugged. Only if it hurts. He smirked. I was wrong. She gave a small, satisfied nod. That'll do. He lingered a second longer than necessary, his fingers tapping once on the table. Then, as if deciding something mid-breath, he said, Have you eaten? Carolyn blinked. Not since, somewhere over Colorado. There's a place I've wanted to try. In Rockridge. Plants on every wall, food grown on site. Pretentious enough to scare most people off, but apparently worth it. She tilted her head. The restaurant with the living wall behind the bar? That's the one. She hesitated just long enough to feel herself deciding. Then she smiled. "I've been meaning to go for years." He stood and gestured toward the exit. "Let's fix that." The drive to Rockridge was easier than either of them expected. No traffic, no wrong turns, just quiet music on the radio and the kind of silence that didn't need filling. By the time they arrived, the early evening light had taken on a gold tint, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The restaurant was everything Carolyn imagined. Hanging ferns dripped from copper planters. Ivy wrapped the ceiling beams. At the center of the dining room stood a wall of moss, lit from beneath like some sacred relic. It smelled like soil and lemon leaves and something lightly sweet. They were seated at a small round table near the back, just far enough from the kitchen to escape the clatter. A single candle flickered between them, its light catching in the rim of Miles's water glass. For the first time, they weren't talking about laptops or deadlines or missing drives. They talked about college, about Miles's childhood in Sacramento, and Carolyn's years teaching elementary science before switching to design. She told him about her mother's iris garden. He told her about a cactus he brought back from a trip to Arizona and kept alive for 9 years. When the food came, they shared bites without asking. Carolyn noticed how his voice changed when he spoke about things that mattered. How it lost that polished edge, took on a roundness she hadn't heard before. Miles noticed how easily she laughed, not the kind of laugh you offer in conversation, but the kind that rises from the chest without asking permission. At one point, she reached to move her napkin and brushed his hand by accident. Neither of them pulled away too quickly. The check came. Miles paid without discussion. Outside, the air had cooled, the breeze pulling scents from the restaurant into the night. Rosemary, citrus, the faintest hint of smoke. They walked slowly back to her car, not in any rush to separate. At the curb she paused, key in hand. "Thanks," she said. "For the meal. And the rescue mission," he added. She smiled. "That too." He looked at her, eyes searching but not demanding. "Strangest day I've had in years." She nodded. "Best one I've had in a while." Neither moved. Eventually, Carolyn opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. Miles stepped back, hands in his coat pockets. As she started the engine, he leaned down just enough to meet her gaze through the window. "Be careful with that drive," he said. "Some things are hard to replace." Her smile lingered long after she pulled away. Carolyn sat in her parked car outside her home, the engine already off, but the dashboard still aglow. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. The house looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Porch light on, mailbox still stuffed from the week, the faint outline of her neighbor's cat curled on the front steps. Nothing had changed, and yet something in her had. She didn't reach for the door. Instead, she pulled out her phone and stared at the time. 9:12 p.m. Not late, but somehow it felt like the day had stretched longer than it had any right to. Or maybe it had just opened up wide, unfamiliar, and not entirely unwelcome. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Still up? If you're not sick of me, I'd like to see that garden proposal." She didn't have to ask who it was. The brevity was Miles. But the softness, that was new. She smiled to herself, thumb hovering. Then she typed, "Give me 10 minutes. Bring your own coffee. Send." By the time he arrived, she'd cleared the dining table, set her laptop in the center, and pulled 2 mugs from the cupboard. Nothing fancy. One with a faded sunflower, the other blank. The house still smelled faintly of mint tea and wood polish. Miles stepped in wearing the same blazer, but the sharpness had worn off. He looked like someone stepping into a space they hadn't expected to feel at home in, but maybe wanted to. She motioned to the table. "I wasn't sure if you were serious." He set his coffee down. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer." They sat side by side, the glow from the laptop lighting their faces as she opened her design files. Renderings filled the screen, graceful archways, native plant clusters, curved paths that wound like thoughts through open green. Miles didn't speak for a long while. He leaned forward, arms resting on the table, eyes moving over the screen with a quiet intensity. "You did all this yourself?" he asked. She nodded. Every brick, every shrub, every lighting zone. I've been working on it for 6 months. He studied a sketch of a rain garden tucked beside a walking trail. It feels peaceful. That's the point, she said. It's not just a park. It's a way to breathe again. He looked at her then, not at her hands or the screen but her. You ever show this to your mom? She passed 2 years ago, Carolyn said. But she helped plant the idea. Literally. She used to make me pull weeds before I could go play. He smiled. Tough love. Green-thumbed love. They both laughed quietly. Came easy now. A long pause followed, but it wasn't empty. More like standing at the edge of a shoreline, listening to waves roll in without needing to say much. I didn't think I'd meet anyone today, he said finally. Not like this. She tilted her head. You mean emotionally unhinged and holding your laptop hostage? He smiled soft and slow. I mean, someone who made the day feel like it mattered. Her breath caught for a second, not because of the words but because of the way they landed. Not heavy, not demanding, just true. I wasn't looking for anything, she said. Neither was I. They sat like that for a while, the sound of the laptop fan barely audible. Outside, a breeze stirred the wind chime she'd almost taken down last fall. They clinked once, then stilled. She closed the laptop gently. Want to take a look at the backyard before you go? His eyebrows lifted. You're trusting me near your plants? She stood, stretching slightly. Let's call it a risk worth taking. He followed her through the kitchen, out the sliding door, into the night. The garden lights clicked on as they stepped into the yard, spilling amber onto pavers and casting long shadows over the beds. It wasn't much, just a patch of lavender, some ornamental grasses, a gnarled apple tree, but it felt alive. He stopped under the tree and looked up at the sky, where stars were beginning to show through the dark. It's quiet out here, he said. She stood beside him. That's the point. He didn't reply, just nodded once like he understood something he hadn't before. They didn't talk about seeing each other again, didn't name what had shifted or where it might go. It wasn't about that. Not yet. But as she closed the door behind him later, the house didn't feel so still, and the air didn't feel so heavy. Sometimes the beginning of something doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just stays,